Alright, so now we're getting into some of the drawers that I find quite interesting and have some of my collection of tools, both old and new. So this is my drawer that I keep a lot of my body working or metal fab, sheet metal fab stuff in. A lot of hammers, dollies, and things like that in here. So we'll start and work our way around. So first in the top corner here, to me, is a bunch of different Eastwood or Fairmount post dollies. These go in the vise, so you can clamp them down in a vise and use them. So we have some round, I have a tapered one. So I have 2 or 3 round ones that I keep in the box. There's a bunch of different sizes you can get, but these are the ones that I use most often. So I've kind of narrowed it down as my drawer gets more full. And then we have this one here that's really nice. So these are great for mounting in the vise, or like for instance on this one, where I have some older ones here. This is another Eastwood one here. And then I have like a really old one here that's really small. So I like these post dies because you can mount them in the vise, but you can also hold them with the handle inside of a quarter panel or a fender, and you can use it to back up a hammer when you're hammering dollying where you can't get your hand in to hold the dolly. So they work really good for a multitude of uses. They work really well. So then moving down here is where I keep all my Clecos. I keep them organized in these little tubs that they come in when you buy your starter set. But you can see I'm way beyond the starter set here. I've collected a ton of these. So I keep them organized by size. It's my 1/8 inch and 3/16. I keep them in there. There's usually a couple pairs of the pliers floating around the shop, but I try and keep at least one in one of the boxes. I have some of my pinch weld clamps here. I use these all the time for door edges and pinch welds and different things where you need a ton of holding force on the edge of a panel. So I have a handful of these that I keep around. A set of 4, 6, 8 of them usually works pretty well, and you can hold a whole panel on or the edge of a panel on with that, and works well. Here's another neat little vintage Porter Ferguson post dolly that works really well. A lot of these vintage tools, no one makes them anymore. They don't make these weird shapes and sizes anymore. So I've picked up a lot of these from old body shop auctions where they're closing and they're auctioning off, and maybe it's multiple generations. Here's another one that's kind of interesting that you can hold up and use as a bunch of stuff you can do with it, but you can hold up and use it as a base for a dolly, for if you're using a slapper or something like that. You can use it to pry. Pretty much there's no rules with these. You just it fits a space and works really well. So I don't use it like this one. I don't use as often, but when I have a space, it pops in your head and you're like, oh, that's perfect for that. So these ones, they don't make sense anymore for a lot of companies to make them because they're so specialized, but they're super handy. I also keep my Eastwood Vixen files in here. So these are good for doing filing off metal or filing off a weld. They're obviously quite aggressive because they're made for filing metal. They're wood-handled Eastwood ones that I have here. I also have a couple of vintage ones, but these are the ones I use most often. The flat one is the one I use the most right here in the center, but there's a half round, a round, and a flat. And I use those depending on the shape of the panel. You'll find use to them. If you do old school leading, you will use those to knock down the lead as well, so you're not hitting with a sander and putting lead up in the air that you can breathe in potentially. So you use the file to knock it down. I have my slapper files in here that I use all the time. I have a coarse and a fine here, and I use these for, you can slap out a panel to show you the high spots in a panel. I also use these quite often if I already have it out to file the edge of a panel, just because they're easy. There are like multiple uses, so I can go down an edge of a panel and file a sharp edge, but I use them most often for slapping high spots. It'll show you the high spots when you tap on the panel, and Eastwood sells these in a multiple grits. So there's a fine, I think there's a fine, a medium, and a coarse. I keep the coarse and the fine. The medium is kind of in between the two of these, and I don't use it as much. So I keep these two in the box. I use the heck out of them. They do wear out over time. Like this one's starting to get pretty worn on this edge here. So I'll probably have to replace it, or I can cut it down and reshape it. You can heat them and reshape them, which is nice if you need to do something weird, though it does void your warranty. So don't tell them I told you, it's okay. Also in here, we have my shrinking disc. So we have the shrinking disc on the website that you can buy, and this is the same one here that's made by Wolf's Metal Fab. This is a stainless steel disc that basically you put on a high-speed grinder, big grinder. There's also a smaller version you can put on your little 4.5-inch grinder, and you use this to heat up high spots, and it's a lot more controllable than using a oxyacetylene torch. You can go over and get loose spots in a panel like oil canning, you can get out, or you can also use it to knock down high spots if you have a panel that just has all kinds of just weird little highs in it when you're sanding it. You can knock it down with this by running over those areas, and it only touches the highs, heats them up, and just lets them fall down into the center and level out with the panel. So you can see mine is well used. All these little grooves in here for me, it's from going over a panel so many times. So I've used the heck out of this and serves me very well. So I also have some homemade dollies. This is a little dolly that has a little piece of I-beam on it with a flat piece of steel that works pretty well. I have a T-dolly over here that works well for hammering metal over. It's got a sharp edge on it to be left. This is just a homemade tool you can put in your vise, works really well. And then I have all my different Fairmount and Eastwood dollies over here. So probably the two that I use, or three I use most often, is we have this doorknob style dolly that works really well with the round on the top from Fairmount, and also the flat on the bottom. This is a nice one to get in small areas. It's easy to handle. We have our heel dolly, which is nice. That's probably one of the most common ones I use. And then we have this one that's a little larger, so I like using this one on the flat edge if you're trying to flatten a longer area. It's nice. You can use it with a slapper to try and slap out a larger area and flatten it out. And then of course it has a rounded on the top to get in a curve in a panel. So with these dollies, the reason I have so many of them, and also hammers when we get to that drawer, is because you need the right dolly and hammer to fit the panel or the area that you're working, so you don't damage the panel. So I keep so many of these around. A lot of them I use, you know, 1 out of 100 times, but when I need them, I have them. You know, so that's why I have all these different ones that are different shapes and different, you know, the older ones have slightly a different shape than the other version, and that's why I keep these laying around. And they serve a purpose once in a while, but when you find the use for them, they are just worth their weight in gold, like, for sure. So that is my dolly and sheet metal fab drawer that I'm always adding to and always running out of space. All right, next is my body hammer drawer. I have a ton of body hammers in here and associated slappers and things like that in here. This drawer, you will see a mix of old and new in here. A lot of these, most of these hammers you will notice are wood-handled hammers. I prefer the wood-handled hammers. The Fairmount hammers come in both versions. So the newer hammers that I have are Fairmounts, and I have 99% of them in the wood handles because I think they have a little bit better of a feel to them. So I keep hammers in all different shapes and sizes because, like I mentioned earlier in the dolly section, you need a hammer that fits the shape of what you're using. Hammers I use most often, I usually polish them or sand them really smooth once a year. So this is one is probably my most used hammer, one of the most used ones, and it is it's definitely, the shine's going away, but you can see that I had actually polished the surface at one point, versus one I don't use as often that I didn't polish. So the Fairmount hammers work really well. I keep a ton of those, pretty much every side. This is one of the grind your own hammers that we offer for a little while that came as a blank and you could grind it to your own shape. So I actually ground the pick vertical on this because most pick hammers, they will see, old and new, the pick is going across like that and isn't vertical. So it's kind of hard to find a hammer that has a vertical chisel end to it. So, you know, I did that, and then a really high crown on it that worked really well and polished that out. So this is a hammer I use and I had ground and sanded myself. And then you'll see some older Eastwood hammers in here that I've ground. This was actually a shrinking hammer that I ground down and made a radius hammer out of it. And then the door skinning edge, I put a more sharper edge on it, which works well. You'll see some old vintage Eastwood tools in here. So I've had this, I don't even know where I got this, but this is an old Eastwood slapper with a leather piece over the top and the wood handle. This works well for aluminum and knocking edges down. You can see it has been used and abused quite heavily, but it works awesome. And I still use it from time to time. And this tool is probably, oh, I don't know, it's got to be 25, 30 years old. It was used when I got it. So this is something Eastwood was selling for a long time. I don't think it's on the website any longer, but that's a good example of an old Eastwood tool that even before I worked for the company, I had, that's been floating in my toolbox for years. I also have a little tucking tool that I made. So it's a homemade tucking tool, and I use this to actually put little tucks in the edge of sheet metal to hammer them out. Works well for light duty work, and it gets used and abused. So that is my hammer drawer. I have all different shapes, sizes, like I said, and they all have their place, but you will see a nice mix of old body hammers and then new Fairmount hammers in here for the ones I use more often. But the really weird, odd-shaped ones, no one makes them anymore. A lot of times you got to go find them at swap meets and flea markets. Alright, so this is my power tool drawer, as I call it. This is the bottom drawer where I keep my most used electric and pneumatic tools. So you will find in here a bunch of Eastwood tools. I mean, 99% of it, honestly, is Eastwood stuff in here. And I keep my most used pneumatic and electric tools. So I have my composite impact guns. I pretty much got rid of all my other impact guns. These are the Eastwood composites. And I love these things. This little stubby guy is amazing. I've used it for all different stuff. I actually got this originally because I have my daily driver is like a 2008 Ford F-250 with the dreaded 5.4 with the spark plugs that break off that everybody hates. And I needed to change the spark plugs in it because it was misfiring. I got this because I saw a video on YouTube that a master tech said he uses a little mini impact gun to vibrate them out, and I got this for that job, and it worked great. And ever since then, I pretty much reached for it for most of my air impact gun stuff. For taking wheels on and off, things like that, it works really well, and it packs plenty of a punch and a little small impact. So I use that probably majority of the time. And then I have the big guy here, the half-inch, that's 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. This one works really well for bigger stuff or heavier things that won't come off. Like when I'm taking apart old axles and suspension stuff on cars that are almost 100 years old, this is the one that I reach for because it has the power to either, if it's not going to remove it, it's going to break it. And it was going to break anyways if it does. So otherwise I have electric shears in here. I use these probably the most out of all the tools in this whole drawer. This is one of the ones I use the most. This is the throatless version that you can actually cut curves with. I cut everything from 16 gauge to 20 gauge with it. It never complains, and I think I might be on maybe my first, maybe second set of blades in 5, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And I use this thing almost every other day, it seems like. Also in here is my air pneumatic rivet tool. So I use this. This is actually originally sold by Eastwood for bucking rivets. We have a solid rivet kit, but I actually have turned this into my tool I use for like the air drift and also the screw buster because it has a progressive trigger. It's not just on off like a normal air chisel. So I use this quite often for a lot of other things other than bucking rivets, especially that screw buster. I use it all the time because I'm constantly taking apart little flathead screws that are stuck. I threw that in this and it works really well. Sanders, you will see all different sanders. I prefer for DA a palm sander. I have a couple different ones floating around. I also have all these different little DA sanders. This is a little 3-inch pistol grip that works really well. I was actually using it to polish some brass with some 1500 grit. Worked really well. Our little 2-inch mini DA. This works really well for sanding tight areas that I use all the time. I have our reversible long reach cutoff wheel. This thing works all awesome and gets used and abused, and it's one of these tools that pays for itself like the first time you use it because of the long reach and get in tight areas. So use that all the time. This little 2-inch surface prep tool is amazing. This is the most underrated tool in this drawer. I throw this thing around way too much. You can see it's all banged up, but this is what I use to finish out a lot of welds because it uses a smaller disc and it's small and lightweight. I can get in and sand a weld seam down really nicely without damaging out a big area where you would use a larger disc. It uses the little half-turn Rolex style consumables that you can get anywhere, and I use everything from these 60-80 grits to knock welds down, or the flap discs, and then of course there is some lighter abrasives for taking off gaskets and things like that. It's nice to have this because it's a dedicated tool, and you can keep your die grinder for other things like carbide bits, and you don't have to swap them out with a tool. You can just do a quick release. So yeah, that's a bunch of the tools that I have in here. Belt sanders, different things like that I use for sanding out welds and things. A lot of my stuff is geared towards sheet metal work, so that's why you'll see a lot of sanders and grinders and cut-off type tools for doing that stuff. All right, on the right side of my box is all these narrow drawers. We'll run through these really quick. There's not as much going on in these. This top drawer, I keep my plastic pry tools that we sell here at Eastwood. There's a bunch of different sets you can buy. I go through these like water because I use and abuse them. They are very good for prying panels or prying seals and interior work and all kinds of different stuff. I reach for these quite often, and I kind of abuse them because they are safer than using like a metal prying tool like a screwdriver or something like that. So I usually reach for these first. And if I can't get it to work with that, then I'll go to something else. But I use these all the time for all different stuff, even taking hubcaps off and things like that where you don't want to damage a polished part. You can use these and they work quite well. So that's my plastic pry tool drawer. I have some of my torch stuff in here. I use an oxyacetylene torch quite often still. So I have a cutting torch head. I have some of my smaller welding heads. This is a micro torch for doing some small sheet metal welding and heating of things. So that's where I keep my oxyacetylene stuff with my cleaners and all that, tip cleaners. Next down is my file drawer. You'll see a lot of just vintage or used up files in here. This one's even a custom one that we heat and bent for something, and I use it quite often actually because of this nice curve. It's a half round file that works really well, and I heat and bend it. And yeah, I use this one pretty often, surprisingly. But I have all different files in here for different things. The most common ones I use is this round one, this half round, and then I'll use the fine or the coarse flat file. But you guys know this is something that you use all the time, whether you're doing sheet metal work or something else. I'm always reaching for files, so it's good to have a bunch of them. A lot of mine, like I said, these are just ones I found at flea markets, swap meets, estate auctions, stuff like that. Buy a box of files and I use them until they're all used up, and then get some more. Underneath of that is my mess. Again, a little embarrassing, but this is my mess of Allen wrenches in here. I keep all different T-handled Allen wrenches. These ones that are up front here are ones that I use quite often. These like yellow, green, and blue handled ones. I use these for different things. Like I believe this one is the one that is used for the SCT. So I grab for this one all the time. I know it by color, so I can just grab it and use it. And then some of these other ones work for different Eastwood tools. They are to move or take the head off of something or adjust it, you can use these. So I keep them out front. And then I of course have my socket style Eastwood Allen wrenches in there. So they all work really well, and all my other stuff is just like thrown in the back, and it doesn't get used a lot. But yeah, a little bit of a mess, but I don't use it too often other than these couple in the front here. All right, down in here is my drill type tools, and again, you'll notice I like these plastic bins. Whenever I can get the empties of these, I'll grab these. These are for the Clecos, so they work really well. I keep all my assorted drill bits in here, nothing fancy. I keep all my like cutting carbide and step bits in this back one. Again, I label these because I can just take a box and take it to the job and measure or read the drill bit and use what I need it for. I have a drill index here as well, an Eastwood drill index that I use for if I need to get real fine incremental drilling, I can do that. Hole saws back here, which get used and abused and damaged quite often, and I go through those like water sometimes. Spot weld cutters, obviously I use them a lot with sheet metal work. So I like this premium spot weld kit because it has the little, oh man, I'm almost out of cutters. Jeez. So this is the style that I like. It has a little pin that has a heavy spring behind it that you can push down. They don't skip as much, and with them having almost like a mill type cutting tool on it, it works a little better than some of the other ones. So this is the one I reach for most often, and I have these. You can buy the replacement bits of them, which I am definitely due for here sometime soon. All right, so this is my cutting drawer, as I call it. This is where I keep a lot of my saw blades in here for the recip saw. I have my little staple gun in here that works well. I've had for years. And I have all these little brown packages. These are all brand new, vintage, like fine tooth hacksaw blades that are all still in the wax. I got these at some kind of like a state auction or something, and I have enough to, I probably got the whole box for like 50 cents or something. They're enough to last me my lifetime and maybe on. I've given away a ton of them. They work awesome, so I just keep those in here. Recip blades I have all different ones. I'm very frugal, as you've probably noticed, and I have like these bent ones that you should throw away, but I keep them for cutting up and using in odd situations where I need to use them in the recip saw. So this is a longer one that I cut down for something where I needed just a short throw, and then I have ones like this that I have cut so you can cut a curve. So if you cut it more narrow, you can actually cut a curve with these larger blades. And a fun fact is the Eastwood electric body saw actually fits these larger Sawzall style blades in, and you can cut them down to cut panels, and they won't break off quite as easy as the little tiny pneumatic body saw blades do, which can be quite frustrating. So yeah, that's that drawer. All right, underneath this is like one of my abrasive drawers. This is for a lot of my Rolox style. I keep flap discs in here, interference pads, stripping pads, different things like that. Also keep my extra mini belt sander setup or sandpaper in there. But you'll notice these Rolox style abrasives, I keep tons of them around. I buy bags of them all the time because I go through them most often. I also keep all my different arbors in here for different size stuff. There's my backing pad for my shrinking disc that I keep in here. But yeah, you'll pretty much, this is where I just throw all my abrasives in here for my flat discs and sanding tools, and I know where to go and dig through here and find them. It's just a little bit of a hassle to keep this stocked all the time because I'm always using them up. Alright, so this is a kind of an overloaded drawer, but this is where I keep a lot of my reamers and taps and different stuff like that in here. I also keep a lot of my knockout punches and dimple dies and different stuff like that in here. So in a different section of my toolbox, I have my Eastwood tap set, but this is where I have all my odd taps in here. Ones that I've just gotten again at swap meets, flea markets, auctions and stuff. I throw them in there just in case I need one or I break one. Doing something dumb, I have extras in there. I have all these different adjustable reamers, and then I also have some of these vintage kingpin reamers that I got at an old auction of a hot rodder that had passed away, and he had all these old Snap-on or Blue Point reamers that are specifically for doing kingpins in different cars. So like this one on the top here is fits all Chevrolet 6 trucks. So this is the kingpin tool for doing like Chevy pickup trucks or big trucks. And I have, of course, the Ford ones that I use quite often. And then I have some of these adjustable reamers in here. So not used in modern cars quite as much, but with older stuff, you use it a lot when you're rebuilding these cars. I also have some of these Eastwood dimple dies that are the draw-through style that you draw a hole and you can punch a hole really cleanly in a panel. And this one, oh, see? There's the knockout in there. This one's a bead style where it'll put a bead around the edge of the hole that you punch in to give it strength, and also is kind of a style thing to do in panels. Looks nice when you're also cutting out access holes and things like that. So I have all different sizes of those that are punch flare and punch bead. They get used like crazy. I have some vintage like Greenlee style knockout punches. I have like this neat one here that I got when I was in California, actually at a yard sale of a retired military aircraft mechanic that was in World War II, and his family, he had passed away, and they're having a yard sale. I found this stuff in their scrap pile. So this is a reversible knockout punch that is made by H.E. Moore Co. that was out of Boston, Massachusetts on K Street back in the day. But this is reversible, so you can cut the large side like that, or you can flip the tool around and flip both sides and you can cut the smaller side. So I use this actually quite often for punching holes for gauges in a gauge panel in a dash. When I make custom dashes, I use that. I use this as just a little spacer depending on the panel. thread the nut on and you draw it through. So it works really well. So I have new ones like the Eastwood ones that are nice for doing stylized holes, and I have some of these real big ones that I've just found at different places along the way, and then we have some little baby ones too. But that's where I keep all that different stuff in here. I also have my rivet stuff in here. So I have all my solid rivets and my bit for setting rivets in there. I have my buck and my dolly drawer. So all that kind of tapping, drilling, forming type stuff I keep in here. My tap handles and stuff, I have that all in here. And yeah, this is kind of, as you'll notice, it's just a theme with these different drawers. All right, bottom drawer is my hammer drawer. You'll see all kinds of different stuff in here that is also wrecking devices, kind of like the wrecking drawer that we showed you earlier. Kind of some neat stuff. I mean, not gonna bore you guys with hammers. I have this super heavy old, like, I think it's leather or cork hammer that is like ancient that I got an old factory estate thing I went to. So this was Garland out of Saco, Maine. And it's a big, heavy, but it's soft face, so it works really well where you need to hammer something in that's tight, but you don't want to mar the surface. This thing uses those it's like wound up leather, and then you tighten the top down when they with this nut here, and it pulls everything together. So I've used the crap out of this. I don't even remember where I found it exactly, but I just know it came out of an ancient old factory somewhere in Poconoza, Pennsylvania. So you're going to see all my different hammers in here. Nothing fancy or exciting. It's just this is the stuff to just do crude work and get things done. All right, so this is the last section of my toolbox and my toolbox tour, and it is the locker side that has these sliders in it, which are really nice, and they are like packed full, totally packed full. I've started to actually outgrow this box, which is kind of surprising. So this top one here, I keep all my different sets in it. I have my Eastwood tap and die set in here that I grab out of there. Like I said, I use this set more often than those orphan ones. The other thing I have in here is a rib nut set, which works really, really awesome. And I have some wiring stuff. So I just keep all my different sets of plastic bins in here. I have my little Eastwood hand punch for punching sheet metal holes. It works really well. And heat gun and different stuff up here, and wiring stuff you'll find in there. And down below here I have, it's just a mess, but it's a lot of my wiring stuff in here. Fuel hose, shrink wrap, edging. I use some of my brake tools that get thrown in here. So this is the straighteners, Eastwood brake line or tubing straighteners. I keep those in here. Eastwood tubing bender for brake line stuff. So it's kind of a mismatch in here of fuel line and brake tools and different stuff like that, safety wire, just a catch-all. Below is my SCT drawer. So this is where I keep all my SCT consumables. I have all the different drums, the narrow drums, the wide drums, the bristle, all the different stuff that I keep in here. This is where I keep all my SCT drums. Keeps them all nice inventory, and I use these things until there's nothing left of them. So that's why you see some of these ones that are really worn down. Edge might be worn down, but I'll use it if I need to do something where I don't want to use a fresh drum. So that's why I keep all these extra drums around, but they work really well. And I use the SCT so much I need a full batch of drums because I pretty much reach for it anytime I'm stripping something down from rust or paint or whatever. I end up using that. All right, last few drawers here. So first we have my sandpaper drawer. This is where I keep all my sandpaper, tack rags, different stuff like that for doing body work and painting. I keep it in here. I also keep a lot of my painter's tape, which I made it up top. But that's my tape that I use for masking tape, obviously. All my different types of sandpaper in here. I keep these small ones that are really nice so you can take a little small pack to the job and you don't have to take a whole roll. You can just use those little Eastwood small packs. So that's where I keep some of my sanding blocks and some of that stuff I keep in here. It's really handy. Next one down is a catch-all. Some of my body working stuff made in there. Steel wool cups, some more block sanders, different stuff in here for my respirators. Some buffing stuff in here. I usually end up throwing my buffing compound in here just to keep it from getting kicked around the shop. So never know what you'll find in there. Then below, I have some Eastwood paint guns. I have my Concourse LT that I keep in here. That works really well. Just used this to paint a dashboard the other day actually, and it worked awesome. I have my carb sinking tool that usually sits at the bottom, but I have this for sinking carbs, so it's an old school tool for sinking carburetors. Works really well. And just some shrink wrap and different things like that in here, vacuum gauge, stuff like that just gets thrown in here. So this side of the box is definitely a catch-all, but I have a lot of stuff that I use quite often as far as consumables go. I have it just kind of stuffed in here. Okay, so that was my little toolbox tour. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing all the Eastwood tools that I have in my box, and also some of the old tools and handmade stuff that I've found along the way. If you guys want to learn about any of the products that you saw in this video, you could click the link down below, or you can visit eastwood.com to get all the tools you need to do the job right. Thanks guys, catch you later.